What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Rise Over Run podcast. I'm here with my two co-founders, Doug Barnett and Brant Choate.
Howdy.
Yo.
How's everybody doing today?
Doing
Great.
good.
Amazing.
You like my sweatshirt that goes along with my greeting? Howdy.
I brought this back
That
today.
is
The
The
crypto
hundreds.
boom.
Do you remember the hundreds?
Yeah.
Are they still cranking?
no idea.
They're a fashion company.
Yeah.
I like it. Before we get into our topic today, this kind of leads into it. We went up to Logan, Utah, 2 days ago. Was it 2 days ago?
3 days ago. It's Monday.
3 days ago.
Yeah.
To talk to a bunch of entrepreneurs, which is kind of cool. Last time we talked about our biggest mistakes, which I thought was kind of relatable. But
We could have gone for hours.
we did the top 8, I think. But on the way home, I remember talking to you guys, or it was one of you, and I said, I wish I would have started a company before I invested in like other startups, because I just didn't know what I didn't know. And I was looking through it this morning in preparation for what we're going to talk about today. I probably met the founders or talked to the founders of the companies I've invested in 10% of the time.
Really?
And
Is that a best practice?
that is the
How
worst
many
practice
total
you can
investments?
possibly do. I think I've done 11.
11 venture investments. and
11
you
or
met-
12.
And you met one founder?
I've met 2 actually.
2 out of 12.
2 out of 12, like face to face.
That's crazy.
So dumb. But I just picked someone, I'm like, hey, I trust this person. They're successful. This is a great idea. It's an amazing deck. But little did I know, like you can have the best of everything, but if the founder is not the right person for the job, or it's not the right, there's so many things that need to happen. But 1A is finding and trusting, knowing the founder.
How many of those 12 investments would you make today?
2.
2 of the 12?
Maybe. Talk to me in 2 years, and then I'll let you guys know.
Because they hit, or you think they'll hit?
I think they might hit, but you never know.
2 for
But
12 is not bad.
But it was so dumb, because that's after starting a company, if you don't have like the right person running the right idea, even the wrong idea, the right person can make a wrong idea, he can pivot until it becomes great. But so that's kind of what I wanted to lead in today with, because we have founders, young founders in our office all the time. I mean, Doug, you just got out of the office and talking with one. Brant, you know a ton of them around here. But I wanted to talk about, like, as an employee, or even what makes like a great founder. As an employee, what traits should you look for, and who are some of the founders that you guys admire, that you guys have looked up to for quite a while?
I think one of the things that I'm looking for is, does this person have a strong opinion that is non-consensus? And can they really tell the story that makes it very convincing? Andy Ratcliffe has a saying, like, the only money that's made in venture is non-consensus. You have to be right and non-consensus. If you're right in consensus, you probably don't make the money because you can't get in the deals, or you get in an expensive price, etc. And then if you're wrong, obviously you can't make money. And so you have to, if you're looking at a founder or a CEO of a startup, and you're saying, okay, when I talk to you, one, can you convince me of a new thing that's going to happen in the world that you guys are putting out there that is actually kind of weird?
But that to me is storytelling. I think the CEOs and founders of companies have to be the best storytellers.
But you can be a great storyteller on something that's not that controversial and sound really smart, and it doesn't really move the needle. So, like, one of the founders that I really respect is Melanie Perkins, the founder of Canva. And I think, they started Canva in 2012, and I think back to 2012, and that was right around the time, if you think about when Adobe was considering whether or not they should move their products to cloud-based.
We were in flight.
It was in flight. So, but it hadn't really launched yet, right? No. Hadn't launched yet. So that was like a bet the company decision at Adobe. It was that big of a deal.
Oh, yeah.
And so for someone to say we're going to democratize design tools and I don't want to say dumb them down, but significantly simplify and allow a much more trained user to be able to design products in the cloud, was like kind of crazy.
Was especially as Adobe had like 3 or 4 products that were that. They weren't cloud focused, but it was like make a slide real easy or make like a lightweight version of Photoshop. Like aiming towards beginners was a thing, but it was like the very smallest category in all of Adobe. Like virtually no revenue came from it.
And they, I don't know, they were like sucking on an exhaust pipe for a long time. And they stuck with it. And now I think they just raised a secondary round at 50 billion post. And they have 200 million MAUs. I mean, that is the type of thing where if you were going to go join Canva in 2013 or 2014 or 2015, you would have had to believe a version of the world that looks obvious today and was like not obvious at all in 2014. And if you want your stock to be worth something, it's like, okay, I'm sitting down with this founder and this thing they're working on seems crazy. It seems super different than what's worked. But when I listen to them talk, I'm like, yeah, I can totally understand how this could work, and I'm excited. So that's like maybe the first thing that comes to mind is the ability to tell a story on something that doesn't make sense. And I believe you.
And Matt Boardman and Tyler Hogue, who invested in us, with the founder of Divi's name again.
Blake Murray.
Blake Murray. They talked exactly about that when Blake Murray had, I think he recruited his first 10 people just off a whiteboard and talking about, this is how American Express, this is how things work, this is how we're gonna do it. And they left there like, this is so different, but I actually believe this guy. And I think this is gonna work. So.
I think the other thing I think about is being relentlessly resourceful. In order to like push a vision of the world forward that is non-consensus, you're typically going to run into wall after wall after wall. And like I can think of a few that I've ran into personally, like Podium, early days, everyone told us we were insane by trying to go sell to small businesses. They're like, SMBs don't buy this type of software. It's never happened. It's never going to work. You guys will never be able to be a $1 billion company. But we put together a sales motion that like kind of cracked this nut that Google couldn't figure out, Facebook couldn't figure out, Yelp couldn't figure out. All these companies that kind of wished that they could sell to car dealerships, doctors, dentists, lawyers, whatever, to the point where they started coming to us and inviting us out to their campuses to try and like understand, how do you do this sales motion? Like it's breaking our brains that you're, getting to these kinds of sales numbers. So I think sometimes, this like owned insight and then being able to put it on a vehicle and like almost, ram through a barrier after barrier after barrier is a key part of it. Another example that like plays out over like a really long time horizon I think is interesting is if you look at Tim Sweeney, who founded Epic Games, who is the creator of Fortnite. The company started in 19...
Have you ever played Fortnite, Doug?
Many times.
You got a win the other day, didn't you?
Well, not the other day, but
You still play it?
no. But the only time I've ever played Fortnite is with my kids.
That's cool.
And crazily enough, like it's been around so long, it went through like multiple waves of very high popularity. And there was a period of time when my son was like a sophomore and junior in high school where it was like, that's all they played all the time. And if I wanted to spend time with my kids, I had to like become competent.
Well, that's cool.
But as my son would say, he carried me.
So I think their story is interesting because the company founded in 1991 and he kind of just wanted to build a video game company as a young guy. And they put out like little simple side scroller games that probably no one's ever heard of at this point. But pretty early on, he had this idea of, we're gonna build a game engine. And like game engines weren't really even a thing back then either. But basically it's, can we build a piece of software, a development kit of sorts that other companies can build their games on top of, and then we take a licensing fee. And this is like at the age of, I mean, like Mario came out like 4 or 5 years before this. Like we're like real early days of video games, and he's kind of already thinking like, oh, we're gonna build the kit that everyone builds on top of. And they end up building the Unreal Engine, which is now one of the biggest development kits that everyone builds on top of. But then kind of like early into that journey, I think around like early 2000s, he started kind of thinking about this metaverse idea and talking about like, okay, the internet's gonna change the way people interact with each other. They're gonna wanna have things like in this digital space, and like they're gonna hang out with their friends there, and it's gonna become a big part of the social fabric of the US. And so he kind of like started putting down, if you go like read the history of this company, these little tiny pieces of this puzzle to the point where, you know, Fortnite comes out in 2015, 2016, and it's like the culmination of all of these things, the gaming engine that they had, all of the investments into their like online infrastructure, and it just like took the world by storm. And I think to this day is one of the few like metaverse examples that has actually worked and become meaningful, to the tune of, I don't know what the revenue is today, but at the height, they were pulling in like $10 billion a year off of digital goods being sold in their little world. So a very, very, very long game, and like insanely relentless founder. And if you listen to him talk, doesn't have all kind of the same attributes as a lot of other CEOs where he's gonna like knock your socks off with charisma or anything like that, but put together something really impressive.
Also, the thing about Tim that's, for me, also very impressive is, I mean, they've been in a fight with Apple for how long now? A decade? Maybe more?
Yeah.
Really long time.
Yeah.
And he just sticks to his principles. And it's, I don't know how much money it's cost them. It's not a small number.
No.
It's billions and billions of dollars by not being in the App Store. It takes a level of determination and grit, and
They're not in the App Store?
no,
That's insane.
because they refuse to pay the 30% tax.
That's
abusive.
insane.
And
It was like the #1 game on the App
Yeah.
Store for the first 2 or 3
I've
years.
never played
they
it in
were
my
out.
life, and I've heard everything about Fortnite.
Yeah.
That's insane.
yeah, this is the type of stuff where very, very special founders just have a way to power through very, very difficult challenges that seem like they're gonna break your back. And I was thinking about this last night. There are so many things, like very, very large problems. And I'm gonna give you guys an example of one that's like, that I'm thinking about right now. So we are 2 days removed from Donald Trump being elected as the 47th president of the United States. We work adjacent to the solar industry. What happens if Donald Trump cancels the Inflation Reduction Act on January 20th?
Things get hard.
This is the type of stuff as founder that you have to think about. Most challenges are not existential, but they can feel that way very, very often. And this is why, like, when I look at Tim Sweeney, I'm like, it is so impressive watching them just really, really plow through extremely difficult circumstances, because the amount of stress that must have hit him when it's like, okay, we're just not gonna be on the single most important computing platform in the world, the Apple App Store. And he just did it. Just figured out a way to make it happen. That is very impressive. And so that, like, for me at least, like that level of course he saw the future, but also just has an insane amount of grit and tenacity and an opinion about the way the world should work, and a refusal to back off of that opinion if he or she believes that it's wrong. And it's, anyway, very, very impressive.
It's funny to tell some of our story to people that like weren't there, or like early entrepreneurs, and to hear like just one thing we'll talk, like, like at the event the other night, we were talking to all these people at the university. We were talking about like having to part ways with a co-founder, and it was hard and whatever, and it was a close friend. And then they're like, "Are you guys still friends?" And we were like, "Not really." And the look on their face was just like, how did you
Gut punch.
how did you recover from that? And inside my head, I was just like, there was like 50 other things like that to get here. It's just what you sign up for.
I think a lot of people, and when you said that, and this is Ben Horowitz, he describes himself as like a wartime CEO. And I think a lot of people are not wartime CEOs, because he mentions the first rule of a CEO, psychological meltdown, is don't talk about the psychological meltdown. And imagine like a lot of these CEOs and founders carry so many things that could absolutely like, I mean, he had to probably take a minute. He's like, we're not gonna be on the Apple Store. Okay, how are we gonna handle this? It's so hard though, it's so hard. And that to me is like, they have to have some sort of wartime, like, you have to get through so much stuff.
There's definitely like some days I find here, depending on what's going on, where I find myself like having to be careful about who I go to lunch with that day, for example, because I do kind of agree that like if you show too much of what's really going on, it scares people, or they perceive you as like being a weak leader, and you lose kind of some of your influence over time. And so there's just some days where I'm like, I know that if I go to lunch with like all of the engineers right now, they're gonna be like freaked out because I like need to like talk about what's going on. And so like the three of us go instead or something like that. And it's not easy to balance, but I think you have to.
Yeah, I put my little kids, my youngest kids, to bed last night, and with subconsciously, I was upstairs in my living room, sitting in the dark on the couch by myself, not looking at my phone, sitting there. I don't know, it was probably 45 minutes just sitting there. And my wife comes up, she's like, "You okay?" I'm like, "Oh."
I'll do that when I pull in my house after just a bad day or something happened, and I sit in my car for a little bit, and then I look down, it's been like 30 minutes. I'm like, oof, all right, time to go in. It's a thing.
This is why like the ability
heavy.
to handle stress, it might be the number one skill of a founder. Like we've been doing a round of interviews because we're hiring, and I'm always fascinated to hear the questions that people ask me in these interviews. I had a really young candidate this week that said, like, why do you want to be a founder? Like, why is it something that you decided to do? And I think my answer very much surprised him. And I answered, I gave my typical answer is like, I wanted to build the company that I wanted to work at, and I wanted to play the game on the biggest stage. Those are the reasons that I became a founder. I had no idea how difficult the first few years of trying to find product market fit would be leading to that point. I think I kind of scared him a little bit. It's like, oh, like, you're kind of crazy, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but it takes a level of, I don't know, is it you just off mentally? Is it like?
I do think it takes a certain level of confidence as well. Not in the sense that like, there's a lot of like imposter syndrome that happens, I feel, when you start a company. At least for me, when you start a company and we had like Todd Peterson or Alex Dunn, now you're like a founder like they were, which is pretty daunting. But you do have to be a little bit crazy in the sense that it's like, I'm gonna leave a great job, I'm gonna leave what I was doing, leave all sorts of safety, bet on myself 100%, take on that accountability, have the spotlight on you, and then just deal with whatever happens. And chances are, most of the time you don't realize how scary it is until you get like a few months or maybe even a year into it, and then you're like, wow, this is what the other founders were talking about, because this is hard.
This is why, like, I look at some of these people, I could never do this. It's so impressive to me. Like, I think about Dylan from Figma.
Yeah.
I'm like, the amount of guts and tenacity and belief in himself and the vision of what they were building must have been so crazy high to just sit in a basement or wherever they were for 5 years. 5 years.
I can't imagine.
Before they launched a product. That is, can you imagine doing an interview, sitting down? It's like, okay, I'm the employee, I'm sitting down with Dylan. I'm like, so when are you guys gonna launch your product? It's like 2 years in. It's like, we've been working on it for 2 years. When do you think you're gonna launch it? I don't know, 3 or 4 years from now.
Imagine being like the father-in-law or the dad of like that guy. Like, what's the husband doing? He's working on a project. How long has he been working on it? 4 years. When's it gonna launch? Maybe in the next year. It's like, you talked about the Notion. Didn't Notion have a similar story?
Yeah, it was like maybe even longer.
And didn't they move to Tokyo or somewhere to where no one could speak the language, purposefully isolating themselves to where they couldn't do anything but work on the project?
They launched in...
Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah. They launched like 10 different times, and if you go look at some of their earliest launches pre going to Tokyo, the product looks even mostly the same. Like, you wouldn't, visually. But if you started to use it, there was enough rough edges where you're just kind of like, I don't get it. But the hardest thing they had to crack that in the early days was like, what do I do with this thing? Like, it's you open it up and there's a white, blank sheet of thing, and learning kind of their methodologies was challenging. But when they went off to Tokyo, they more or less put together like all of these templates, they fixed all the bugs, and they kind of brought back clear use cases and clear examples that push forward like their new vision of the world, their new way of doing like a Google Docs alternative, you could say. And then the thing just like skyrocketed.
How long did it take them from like idea to launch any revenue?
I think it was like 6 or 7 years.
How many companies? Is that pretty, like Notion, it's...
Very abnormal.
Like Figma. That's a long time.
It's a long time.
It's maybe a little more common in other industries.
And
like,
how many employees do you go through when you take that long to launch a product, to where people are probably like, or co-founders are like, it's been 4 years and we're not even close?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about a tech company, you're always talking about under 10. But yeah, I think if you're looking at other industries, like hardware is going to be like way longer time horizons, way more people. Some of the people that are launching rockets, like Relativity Space, just kind of had one of their first launches.
Yeah, that's pretty normal.
I
or
met
like
them
Boom Arrow, like they're years into their...
2015 is when they got started, and then they're launching their first thing 10 years later. That's maybe a little more, yeah.
The other one that I really like just respect so much. I was thinking about this a lot, and like, we're not going to turn this into an Elon Loves Fest, but like, because he's the best at pretty much all of it. But to watch somebody lay it on the line like he has over and over and over again, and one of the people that I really respect, I think Brett Adcock is kind of like this. He's made a ton of money, and he's still building. And what I was hoping was like, just feels like we still have a lot of our very, very best leaders and business people that are kind of on the sidelines, post-exit, kind of just chilling and enjoying kind of the fruits of their labors. I really wish watching Elon do that, or somebody like Brett who just keeps going back and he just founded another company, is so impressive to me. Post making a bunch of money, like, you are in it for the love of the game to build. And it's so hard to know exactly what's going to drive you and motivate you, but I really hope that that can be true for me. If we can get to the place where, Remy becomes a valuable company, I don't want to stop. I think that is a very noble thing, to just stay in the game and build.
There's more to it though, because after you build a successful company, you have like the utmost praise and respect of everybody. And I think a lot of people stay on the sidelines for fear of like, I'm in a great spot now. If I start building again and it doesn't work out, then what? Then I lose everything that I kind of already worked for. So to that point, like, it's so impressive when people start like 2, 3, 4 companies, because they're really in it, not for praise, not for money, but to continue to provide value.
They have everything to lose.
Everything to lose.
Yeah.
Literally, yeah. Against all odds. Like, if you build and sell a valuable company, like, everything's already against you. But to do it again and to do it again, there's multiple like 3, 4 time founders that have hit like 3 or 4 times, but they've failed behind the scenes.
I think almost every case you can think of, their fear of being disliked is almost zero. Like they just
I think
somehow
you're right.
get over that completely. If you think about all the things that, Elon does on a regular basis, like he's probably one of the most hated people in the world,
No question.
but somehow still kind of keeps doing like one mega valuable thing after another. And oftentimes for 5 to 10 years where no one understands what he's doing. Like I think to this day, your average American does not understand what SpaceX is doing and for. They just think Elon's this rich guy that wants to flex and show his power by getting to Mars. They don't understand that all the things that are like launching up on those rockets every time into space, including things that will help like the environment and, like
Free speech and all this stuff.
noble causes that people claim to care about,
Yep.
but do nothing to fix.
Well, also, this is why like being in the game matters. So Ben Thompson wrote about this week about basically like if you look at the Twitter acquisition in just a complete isolation, it was a terrible purchase.
Horrible.
$44 billion, there's no way it's worth anywhere near that. But as far as like what it enabled him probably to get done with SpaceX now, it was worth it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if you just keep at it, and I think Elon has been wrong so many times. And they've messed up so many, think about how long he's been saying full self-driving is right around the corner. Mm-hmm. It's been at least 10 years of him saying this. And he's been getting people to pay for it for 10 years. But if you just keep going, you just keep going. And so this whole tenacity thing is like, it's so important. And you have to be willing to be wrong, which means you have to be non-consensus. Back to this, is the non-consensus thing is probably connected to the I don't care if people like me bone.
Do you think as a founder that you have to have the same skills to be like a public CEO? Or do you think it's like they have to have different characteristics or different traits?
I think there are many public CEOs who are different than founders. That does not mean a founder can't be a good public CEO, but I think it requires innovation on the founder's part to be able to navigate the public market effectively. 2 examples. One, I've talked about this before with Brian Chesky, but instead of managing a quarter at a time, they set a 2-year roadmap that adjusts every 6 months, and they let the chips fall where they may. That's cool. Another example is Mark. When Mark Zuckerberg took Facebook public, he changed the voting rights on his shares because he refused to not have complete control of the company. And so he has the Class A shares, but his Class B shares, I think, have 10x voting rights. And once he gets rid of them, they lose those voting rights. And so, I think founders need to have some unique thing that they're bringing into the market in order, or take Alex Karp with Palantir. They went public with 125 customers. That's weird. That doesn't happen. So I think you can be. Well, not everybody can be.
It does take different skills to take a company from 0 to 2 than from 3 to 10 though, for sure. A little more refined.
But Palantir's been at it for 20 years. So I'm sure Alex has grown a lot over that period of time, but they've been at it for a really, 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 really long time. And they were very non-consensus for a very, very, very long time. So hopefully you can navigate it. And Mark has for sure learned through being a public CEO. But it's probably only the best. Only the best can.
I think at the end of the day, when you're going public, you're all of a sudden not being everything's on display. So if you're a private company CEO, you can get away with all kinds of mistakes around managing your P&L.
Be reckless. You can,
Yeah, and you can say things to the public that they don't like, but they don't really have any recourse against you directly. But when you're a public company CEO, everything you do is under scrutiny, and all of your financials are on display all the time. And so it seems like there's 2 different approaches in managing this. You have people that get brought in as professional management class folks who are going to manage quarter to quarter, and they know how to play the game. They know how to play Wall Street and kind of say the right things, do the right things. And it's almost this playbook that they all just check boxes on quarter after quarter. Then you have some of the other people who tend to be the founders who can tell like a longer time horizon story that's believable. Like this is what Jeff Bezos famously did for 20 years. He's like, yeah, it's cool. I know all the rules. We're going to lose money quarter after quarter after quarter. Trust me, it's worth it. And to actually believe him that it was worth it takes like, you know, a special person.
What percent of founders do you think are the CEOs by the time their company goes public?
Very small percentage.
Like 5.
It has to be, right?
Yeah.
Very small.
But this is, to what Brant's talking about the like thinking out into the future, I just listened to a podcast with John Collison. Like as an example, Patrick Collison could 100% be a public CEO. Zero question in my mind about that. They've chosen to stay a private company. And basically John just said, there's really 3 core tenets as to why they've stayed private. One, he's like, we have lots of products that are on 10-year time horizons. And we want the chance to incubate them the way we want to incubate them. And we don't really want the pressure of, he says it much more eloquently and kind of in a little bit more of a winding road, but essentially he's like, we don't want to have to answer on these very large bets 1 quarter at a time. We're not interested in that. The second thing is he believes that the private markets now have the ability to give their employees and their investors a lot of the benefits of being a public company. Liquidity. And they've proven it that they can do it. They do basically these large secondary rounds almost annually now. They don't schedule them annually, but that's kind of what's been happening. And then the third thing is, you know, the other reason that people kind of get grumpy about these private companies not going public sooner is, well, your average Joe is not getting to invest in these companies, and you don't give them the chance. And he said, yeah, well, most of the investors, the LPs of the companies that invest in us, are public pension funds, teachers unions, so we do think that they're getting a chance, and so I think the best founders have the ability to think about these things very, very contextually, whether or not they go public or not, and so that's why it's interesting to talk a lot about some of these private CEOs, because I think many of them are very, very, very good. And they've just chosen, for whatever reason, to keep the company private.
So I hope this helped everyone out there who's actually like an employee looking to join a company, and the characteristics we see as important in founders, and hopefully it helps everyone. Appreciate everyone hopping on.
See ya.
See ya.